And welcome to Maine Voices Live. If you were like me, you needed a night out, didn't you? Needed a good laugh, a little bit of levity. I am not recovering from this loss. No one saw it coming. And you know I'm talking about the Patriots on Sunday night. We can't get over it. All the polls were wrong. But I'd like to thank you for coming tonight. And this is our final Maine Voices Live for 2016, but we'll be back in 2017. And we look forward to some suggestions from you on who you would like to see up on this stage. So get ready, because we'll be sending you an email survey tomorrow for your feedback. It is also that time of year where we ask for your support of the Bruce Roberts Toy Fund. We have a donation jar out in the lobby, so feel free to help support us on your way out and help get toys into the hands of thousands of kids this holiday season. And now I would like to thank our sponsors, and I would like to start with Sam and Betty Novick, who I see right up front from Hub Furniture. Thank them for furnishing our set. Which, at the end of the season, I have to tell you, it's looking good. I mean, we had a lot of people, a lot of butts and seats up there, so the furniture is holding up well, and it looks great. I'd also like to thank the Press Hotel, who puts our guests up at the hotel, and I know Tim is looking forward to spending some time there tonight. Our series sponsor is New England Cancer Specialists, and since 1978, they have been focused on one thing only, and that's the very best outcome for their patients with cancer. As the region's leading oncology practice last year, they served more than 3,100 people with many types of cancer and blood disorders. And they have national and clinical affiliations, so they can often get their patients earlier access to state-of-the-art treatment options. They have offices in Scarborough, Kennebunk, and Brunswick, and we thank them for their support of our series. Thank you. And I would like to give a huge thank you to HM Payson. They are our presenting sponsor, and they have been with us for the entire season, supporting the folks that are on stage here, and they're also with us again for 2017. So we really thank them for their partnership. For more than 100, let's give them a hand. Thank you. For more than 160 years, they've been an integral part of the Portland community, and they really believe strongly in support of the arts and the free exchange of ideas and viewpoints, and that's more important than ever, and they have been with us every step of the way, sponsoring not only this event, but so many other organizations throughout the city. So thank you to HM Payson. And now it's my pleasure to talk about Tim Sample. In his opinion, now is the perfect time for a laugh, and during these particularly divisive times, after a presidential election that's further divided the country, laughter can be common ground. My goal is to be in front of a group of little old ladies, Catholic nuns, agnostics, yuppies, triplets, whoever, and have them all laughing at the same time, he recently told Press Herald reporter Ray Routhier. That's the power that humor has. During a career spanning 4 decades, he has become Maine's best-known humorist, and he's worked to keep alive the specific traditions of Maine humor. He's lived and performed all over the state and brought Maine national attention during his 11 years as a correspondent for CBS Sunday Morning from 1993 to 2004. And his Postcards from Maine segments introduced the country to lobster boat races, urchin diving, mud season, and the ups and downs of potato farming. He's recorded humor albums, done audiobooks, voiceover work, and written more than 6 books, including the Maine classic, Sunday Night at Moody's Diner. A native of Booth Bay Harbor, Samples lived in Brunswick, Portland, and now lives in Calais. And tonight, Tim will have a conversation with Press Herald reporter Ray Routhier. Ray's been a feature writer at the Portland Press Herald and Maine Sunday Telegram for more than 22 years, covering entertainment, pop culture, and lifestyle. Please welcome to the stage Tim Sample and Ray Routhier.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Lisa.
Good luck, Ray.
Sunday night at Moody Steiner. It must be the sequel to Sunday
Yeah, I was going to
Night
say,
at Moody Steiner.
I might have, yeah.
Sunday morning.
Did you
Hi,
have one for
everybody.
every day of the week, I think?
Must have been nothing good on cable.
Thank you, everybody, for coming out. Tim, thank you for coming here with us tonight. And I thought I would let you share with people your big thrill that you got when you checked in. I guess two big
Yes.
thrills when you checked into the Press Hotel today is that they thought you were Carolyn Shute.
Oh, you can't. You
Right.
gotta let me tell it. You
Okay,
gotta tell me.
yeah,
You gotta let me-
I probably should.
you gotta let
You
me
are
tell it.
the
You gotta let me tell it.
storyteller, aren't
So
you?
people are always asking me, where do you get your material? And my response is, obviously, you're not paying attention. Because I don't know, it just seems it jumps up and bites me every day. So I am going to the Press Hotel. Now, I have to tell you that I have a history with that building. In 57, 58, Deb, help me out here, there was a kiddie show, a WGAN had a kiddie show there, and I was on television for the first time. And the rest is history. But in that building. And then when they refurbished it into a hotel, they asked me to, they contacted me because they said they have printed up statements from famous writers, people like John Steinbeck and Tim Sample. And so the Tim Sample quote is in every bathroom. And it's a quote about, and it was from something I did on Sunday morning about how Mainers always seem to be able to get a little extra use out of something. It means, don't use the towel if you can use them again, like they say. But I took a picture of it, sent it to Steve King, and I said, you're really famous when you're on bathrooms at high-scale hotels on the wall. But anyway, so I showed up. So I showed up today, and I pulled up, and I was, running a little late, and I came in, and I said, I'm Tim Sample. Tim who? Tim Sample. What? How do you spell that? Like that. That was the celebrity treatment. And then I said, well, I'm doing this thing with the Portland newspapers. They might be under, Maine Voices. I told them like that. They looked, and they said, yes, but we have it Carolyn Shute. And I said, I don't have enough dogs, guns, or flannel to share a bedroom with Carolyn Shute. You have to get oh gosh, so I was off to a bang just when the thing started off tonight. Right?
But where in the Press Hotel are the John Steinbeck quotes? If you're in the bathroom, where'd they put him, in the cellar or the?
No, he's like on the TV, I think.
Oh, makes sense.
He says something about people don't write stories, stories write people, or something like that. It's a John Steinbeckian thing.
In case you didn't know it, Tim, you are pretty funny. And when did you?
Thank you, Ray.
And I wondered when you first realized that you were funny. Like, what was the moment when you were a kid or in school or whatever, when you thought you could make people laugh, get through situations by making people laugh?
Well, my sister's in the audience tonight, so she will debunk any of this, but she knows this is true. Things in our home growing up in the 50s and 60s were pretty weird. The 50s and 60s were pretty weird. I mean, it was the Cold War, and then it was the hippie generation. It was everything. It was a lot of people not knowing what to say or do. And like a lot of people who end up being humorous, end up being comics, I was the class clown, and I provided comic relief in situations, and I could kind of distract from whatever wacky thing was going on, and that you'll find that a lot of people that end up doing this for a living have some kind of a backstory along those lines. But I also realized quite quickly, in the little town of Booth Bay Harbor, which was a little town back then, it was just kind of a fishing village. It's gentrified considerably since then, but they were like, I went to kindergarten and graduated from high school with the same 43 kids, so it was like that little, everybody knows everything about everybody. It's not accurate, but they know it, and it's very, so somewhere along around 7th or 8th grade or something, it dawned on me that I didn't see very many options for a way to make a living. I wasn't cut out to be a lobsterman. I tried that one year, and that got me into doing something that didn't involve quite so much physical labor. But I found I had this aptitude and this ability. I could make people laugh, and I could sing and play guitar and crystal. And actually, honestly, Ray, it was like, okay, when did the Beatles come? 63, 64, 64, they came to LaGuardia, right? And so I was 13 years old. And they were grown-ups. They were in their 20s. They were like adult men, right? And I was a kid. And I'm looking, and I don't know if you even remember what it was like on television in the 60s, but it was very formulaic, very prescribed, everybody standing straight and holding microphones. And, you know, the saying to John Lennon, how do you find America? And he says, turn left at Greenland. And I'm thinking, it's a gig. So that was kind of the beginning. And then I played in bands. I moved to Portland in '69. I played in a lot of bands around here, the Dubious Brothers and others. But the bands were so bad, and nobody could figure, and everybody was so stoned, they didn't know how to tune their guitars or what to play, and the Iron Horsemen were beating people up in the back of the room and stuff. So I had to just run my mouth just to kind of keep everything moving along. So I cut my teeth on, so places like Joe and Nino's Circus Room. And
Wow.
Yeah.
You said something about everybody knew everything about everybody. It wasn't accurate, but they knew it.
Yeah.
And that reminds me of, you and I had this conversation before about sort of this period that we're in now where you can go on the internet and find anything to back up what you believe is true.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's a very strange time.
Yeah,
and I know that you
yeah.
you've always talked about humor as a way to maybe bridge that kind of stuff, to bridge the tensions, to bridge, or is it just funny that people can go online and find out, prove that, Mars is actually purple, or...
Well, what I find that humor does, if the kind of humor that I have been fascinated with all my life and that I try to reflect in my work, is a humor that finds a common experience. And I'm not comparing myself to these people, but if you look at enduring humor, you look at the farces of Shakespeare, okay, the Midsummer Night's Dream, Much Ado About Nothing, or whatever it is, okay, there are setups, there's funny situational stuff going on hundreds of years ago that's still funny today. Why is it still funny? Because the basic building blocks of the humor are human nature. It's things like insecurity, avarice, hubris, it's just all these things that we all feel. And this is true of Mark Twain, it's true of Will Rogers. And what I'm always looking for is a kind of humor. I'm quite appalled in many ways at what has become of what is now referred to as comedy, to the extent that, and I'm not saying there aren't funny people around, but a lot of comedy is extremely mean-spirited and vicious and nasty, not to mention profane, and it's divisive. I was talking to Noel Paul Stuckey, a dear friend of mine, and we've been playing together this year for 40 years. And I opened for Noel in 1976 down at Portland City Hall, but we were talking about how in the old days, and Noel was always the comedian of the group of Peter, Paul, and Mary, and people, if you were funny, if you were a comedian, people, when I first started out, they would say, oh, you the comedian? Oh, we're looking forward to it. We'll have fun tonight, like that. Now, they'll say, are you the comedian? Oh, we can't sit near you. We have to, because they think if they're around the comedy, they're going to be made embarrassed, and I find that appalling, because what I'm looking for is a kind of story or a kind of humor that provides insight and a twist. And Maine humor is just the traditional Maine storytelling is really fascinating in that regard, because a lot of it is about nuance. It's almost never mean. But Marshall Dodge always said, Maine humor punctures pomposity. The one thing you can't get away with in Maine is to somehow think being from away makes you better than the local people. That you will never, I've told people you can come to Maine from anywhere, they will open arms, as long as you don't think that somehow being from away or having this or doing this makes you better, because because that's a value. And it's good information, and it's true, I'm sure, in a lot of other places. But so the kind of humor that I think teaches a lesson, and if it's good, you can see yourself in it. I'll give an example, humor telling on myself. I recorded in 1989, I was in Caribou, Maine, and they had just built the new Performing Arts Center at the high school, and I was the first act. I recorded, and it was it was sold out, but it was a benefit for the local fire department. It says right on the wall, seating capacity 840. They sold 867 tickets, but they're the fire department. They make the rules, they break them. I mean, this is my life, I just, okay, whatever. And so I recorded this album called Snappy Answers. And my mother still thinks it's the best album I ever did, but it was just one of those nights that you're cooking with gas. You couldn't do it to put a word wrong. And they were just roaring with laughter. And in those days, I recorded on 2 tracks. The audience was stereo. The audience was on one track, and I was on the other track. And we would go down to Tim Tierney's studio, or back then it was Martin Kleitzman maybe, but anyway, down on Center Street, where I've been recording for years and years and years. Tom Blackwell was the engineer. So we sit down, and the first thing you do is you get the levels in. So the audience is over here, and I'm over here in the VU meters, and the audience is like, wah, wah. It was just like knocking the meters off. And Tom turns to me and says, "Wow, where did you record this album?" And I said, "Well, up in Caribou." He said, "Wow." I said, and I made that, I committed the cardinal sin. I said, "Well, I'm pretty popular up there." and Tom, without missing a beat, Tom says, "Yeah, on the other hand, Tim, there ain't that much going on."
That's right.
You see, but that's not mean.
No.
But who hasn't? See, the thing that I feel is important about humor and storytelling, I want people to feel at the end of the evening that they have more in common, that we're closer together. I firmly believe, deeply believe, that people, for the most part, we're mostly more alike than we are different. But this echo chamber effect on the internet and other things, and people just only listening to what they hear. Maine is a great, types of humor, like British humor, Appalachian humor, Cajun humor, whatever it may be, they arise out of a certain petri dish. There has to be certain elements that are right to create that kind of humor. And in Maine, what it is, so here we got this state. It's the only state that is only attached to one other state. We're way up here. Growing up in Maine, we didn't have any ball teams. We didn't have any rock bands. Everything came to Boston and like this. We just had to get the drags and and they drifted on here. So we have that. We have this fierce pride of place, but we also have this annual deluge of people coming through who, they're just here for, it says vacation and on our plates, but they're on vacation, not us. And so what you get is you get this free zone. You get this kind of, and so you have all this whole wonderful body of work that has to do with, people always ask, why the big deal about being from away? And I've just done, one of my albums, I said, if your parents were in a speeding car heading for the state of Maine and you were born in the back seat, half a mile short of the Welcome to Maine sign, you lived in Maine for 99 years and you passed away, the Booth Bay Register would say, out of stater dies in Maine. But the obverse of that is also true. If you were born in Bangor and you were 1 day old and they put you on a jet, they flew you to Shanghai, and you lived in Shanghai for 95 years, and you died in Shanghai, the Bangor Daily News would say, local man dies in Shanghai. It's just, and it's endlessly fascinating, not least because it's irritating a little bit, but the source of the irritation, why is that? Well, I'll tell you what it is, in my opinion. So here we have a lot of people with limited resources, hardworking people, got to work 6 jobs, they got to go clamming, and they got to go urchin diving, and all this other kind of stuff. And a lot of that, or a certain degree of that, in my experience growing up, was, somewhat volitional. I mean, they like doing that. It's not, they don't consider it a hardship, but it's a rough life, and like this. And these people come in, and they got money, and they can buy everything. They can buy the boat, they can buy the lobster boat and turn it into a lobster yacht, they can buy everything, but they can't obtain for love nor money native status. So it's the one thing we have that you can't get. You can't buy it. We got it right here. You can't have it, But I guess the universal, the part of that I think is healthy and positive and serves as a palliative and a social, to a certain extent, a lubricant of things is, in good humor and healthy humor, you can see yourself in multiple roles in the thing. We're all, at any given time, we're all a tourist somewhere, we're all a native somewhere, and that's important information. And I think Maine, by its very, culturally, Maine is very accepting. I've always said to people, I said, Maine, they say, oh, they're so backwards, because I've traveled all over. I've performed, I think, in 26 of the states and Canada and stuff like that. People say, oh, Maine. And I could tell you lots of stories about where I was, and people say things about Maine. But Mainers are actually very progressive and open to new ideas, but they don't want you to come in and tell them, just because you're from Yale doesn't mean you have a good idea. What's the idea? Can we give you the idea? We'll tell you if somebody comes up with a better idea, they'll jump on it. You get the lobs. We had the old lobster traps that 5 million of them are on lawns in New Jersey now. And but you come up with a different trap that fishes better. They all switch in 1 year. It's not like we're just stuck in the old ways. But I said, if you want to start a religion, go to L.A., not Lewiston, Auburn, Los Angeles, California, and come up with any random thing. L. Ron Hubbard did this. Just make something up, and you can have adherents, and you'll have 5,000 people a year later. The same thing in Maine. Well, if you have really good church shepherds, you might get a couple of converts 10 years down the line. They're waiting to see how it pans out. But that's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
That's all about the building blocks of human nature. So that's what I'm shooting for all the time.
When you're talking about Maine humor as puncturing pomposity, and I know you're a student of Maine humor and sort of people who told stories before you, I wonder if you could give an example or two of those kinds of stories, the stories you're talking about.
Oh, yeah.
Where the teller is really puncturing somebody's pomposity.
I owe a great deal to the many great humorists that I learned from, some of whom I had the great good fortune to know and work with, others who were generations earlier. But of course, Marshall Dodge, God bless Marshall Dodge, who passed away so tragically in 1982 at the age of 45. And he and I were traveling the previous summer of 81, we traveled to Sample and Dodge all around the state. And it was like taking a master class, a tutorial from really one of the greats. And Marshall used to tell one about the farmer. He's working out in his field, and this fellow pulls up in a big fancy car, and he's admiring the man's acreage, his property, and he has this big fancy car, and he stops and he asks the guy, he said, how many acres you got here? And, oh, enough for me and mother, very understated. We get by, or like that. And but the fellow said, well, I come from Texas, and where I come from, he said, I got a spread. I can get in my car in the morning, drive all day long, never leave my property. The farmer says, yes, I can see that. I had a car like that one time myself. and one of the great sources of humor, because I knew Maine, as a state, has the highest, without a doubt, CPSI index of any state in the Union, which is characters per square inch. Yes. And growing up in Boothbay Harbor, so Elliot Winslow, just to give you just an example, the type of, now, he was a real guy, but you couldn't make him up. You could not make up Elliot Winslow. Here's a good example. Elliot passed away summer of 2006. 94, I think it was, 93 or 4, he had lived very healthy right up till the end. But the previous summer, when he was 92 or 93, he rented the Pythian Opera House, put a full-page ad in the Boothbay Register, invited everybody in town to come, and he held a wake for himself. Okay. Just so you know what Elliot's like. And he sat up on the stage, and everybody in town came, and he had them all get up and say what they were going to say at his funeral. And then he corrected them. This is a real person. So Elliot, we were filming something for one of the TV specials that I was doing, and I went over. I could always get Elliot, and I got him, and I was asking if he had people come in. This is a kind of a puncturing pomposity thing. Or it's a variation on that. It's a little subtler than that. But anyway, Elliot, oh, yes. I said, do you ever run into people asking directions? And, oh, yes, to me. I remember 20 years ago or so, these two guys, a little sports car, and he tells me the story. He said they were peak tourist season, the tourists was all over, and they packed their car in the lot. They started arguing, they drove off, and I didn't think much of it. Half hour later, they come back, they stopped the car, got in the trunk, got a road map, and then they started arguing about that, and then they got back in the car and started up again, drove off again. Took a better part of an hour to get back that time. At that point, I thought this happened on Southport Island, where you go across the Southport Bridge, and he's right there at Robinson's Wharf, and I set that up early in the story, and so did he. He said, so finally I went over and I said, you fellas lost, are you? He said, yeah. Yeah, they said, well, yeah. He said, you trying to get off of Southport Island, are you? Yeah, that's what we're trying to do. He said, you trying to get off of Southport Island by driving west? I said, that's precisely what we've been doing. He said, there's your trouble. He says, you can't get off of this island by driving west. He says, if you was to do that, you'd be the first ones that's ever done it. If you want to get off this island, you want to take a tip from an old timer that's lived around here his whole life. You want to get off this island, you only got one option. You could take that car of yours, turn it 180 degrees, head it in the easterly direction, and drive back across the same bridge you come across to get onto the island in the first place. Well, they said, we didn't come across no bridge. Oh, says Elliot, he says, I take it back. Your trouble is you ain't here yet. But you see that nobody's being mean, exactly. But there's a lot of information about power differentials and I think really in a lot of this, if it's working properly, it's actually about being mindful and respectful that there are different perspectives. The essence of what makes humor funny, and that's a dangerous thing to start off saying, because it's like saying, it's like if you ever look at the Audubon bird pictures, he killed them all. They look like dead birds. I'm sorry, they don't, so you don't want to overthink a joke, or it looks like it's a dead joke, But essentially, what great humor has, what makes that spark and that aha insight is perspective shifts. You think it's going to. I remember years ago, I told you this, Ray. Dick McPherson was the Patriots coach for one disastrous season or something, whatever. This was years ago. And Larry Mahaney up in Bangor used to have these sports banquets that Steve King and I would go, and they would have all the Billy Swift and the Parisian Sisters and Ricky Craven and all the Maine people that had. And we'd have an awards banquet like that. Well, this one year, I didn't know Dick McPherson from a whole other guy. He's a great big friendly guy, a big ex-football player. So he's going to give the awards. The Parisian Sisters couldn't make it. They were at the Olympics, so they broke their leg or something. I don't know what happened, but they couldn't make it. So Dick was going to do, I was like the MC, and Dick was going to give this award. And there was a nun there. Okay, so this is I don't like to offend people, so right away I'm sensitive about how he's going to handle that, because he's kind of this kind of jock kind of guy, kind of big bluff guy, and he starts off and he has the award and he says, "Hey, sister." He said, yeah, what order are you? And whatever, Carmelite or what. Yeah, he said, I know that order. He said, I grew up right next to a cathedral. He said, I remember it very, very well. He said, and I'm thinking, I'm not comfortable where this is going. This is not about the Parisian Sisters, it's about Dick and nuns, and I'm thinking this isn't really going to go someplace good. He says, yeah, I remember when we were kids, we never liked to go to church, and my tension level's going up. He says, as a matter of fact, I remember one morning, he said, and my mom was telling you, Dick, you and Susie, Come on, you got to eat your breakfast. Billy, you got to come down here. You got to have your breakfast. You got to go to mass. You know, like that. We came down, and Billy wouldn't come down. We finished our breakfast. Time to go. Billy, you're going to be late. You got to get down here. Look at Billy, and Billy wouldn't come. Finally, she said, Billy, you got to get down here, and you got to go to mass. And he let out. He said, I'm not going to mass. I don't like them, and they don't like me. And I'm thinking, where is this going? I'm very upset. And he said, and Mom said, Billy, but you have to go. You're the priest. And it was... You see what I mean? It's just like everything shifted. And to me, that's a wonderful kind of story in the modern era, because who hasn't watched a comedy routine, even by a talented person, and thought, don't go there. Don't go there. Don't go there. Or a politician. But
But is that where the humor comes in, sort of the tension and the surprise, that it doesn't,
well,
it doesn't
the
go
humor
where you
comes
think it's
in
going?
because the reason I told that story is that humor always involves a change in perspective. And if I were to define what learning is, any kind of learning, it's seeing things from a different perspective. I mean, I think the arts, broadly defined, whether it's writing or painting or music, or, you know, it changes your point of view. You see things, the artist says, I always say, what artists do, what creative people do, in my estimation, is we go into the invisible world, the world of perceptions and observations, and we return and bring forth into the visible world, or the audible world, something from the invisible. We apprehend something, and we bring it, and we give birth to it in your world, so that you could say, oh, this is what you found there in your imagination or in your exploration. You find that. And to me, what humorists do, if we're doing it well, is we see things. I'm always seeing things that just strike me as funny. I mean, I just think it's, you know, I see the sign, and it doesn't say Tetley Tea anymore. It says Etelta, and it just sticks in my head. And I'm going, oh, Etelta, and it sparks something. And so, what I think is healthy and hopeful and positive for the human race is anything that gives us the notion that we are all kind of the same, that we may say it differently, look at it differently, and that's why dialect and colloquialisms, they're quirky and they're fun, but we all have them. They have them everywhere. I wrote in my book, Answers to Questions Nobody Was Asking, I talk about this. Yeah, there are these things like, when I was a kid, we would say things like on the playground, if you wanted the next turn on the swing, we would say, I hosey that. H-O-S-E-Y. Now, my wife comes from Minnesota. They would say, I have dibs on that, but they wouldn't know, hosey would be, they wouldn't know that from anything. But the one that I thought cracked me up was, we grew up in Booth Bay Harbor, where I grew up, these big old ancient school buildings that everybody went to for years and years. And the bathrooms were down in the basement of these big frame buildings, and you had to raise your hand and say to the teacher, what we said was, may I go to the basement? Well, everybody knew what you meant. You're going to the bathroom's in the basement. But I know people who are 50 and 60 years old or older, my age, who say, excuse me, I'm going to the basement. And if you're not from that area, that's a little, really, you know, change a fuse. I mean, yeah. But see, I think that's funny. I don't know if you've ever gone through, like in Heathrow and Orly Airport, when you're flying internationally. In Heathrow, I know for years they had this. You go down there and they say, know what you're saying. And they have these hand gestures and what it means. And different, you know, this, you know, you could, and they don't mean the same thing in every culture. Just be aware. You know, hi there, we're number one, you know. Don't say that to me.
So if Maine humor punctures pomposity, and it's gentler, it's not mean-spirited, it helps see things from a different perspective, how can you use Maine humor to fix the world, Tim? Because we live in a
nothing to it.
But what I mean is we're living in a time where it's very tense, and I just wonder what kinds of things can Maine humor, you know, sort of.
Okay,
how can we look at this in a funnier way?
Maine humor has its own flavor, obviously, but all good humor, all great humor, And families of humor, the Shalom Aleichem stories, the Jewish humor, is all the American sitcoms, the Dick Van Dyke Show, and all the sitcoms of the 50s are steeped in this Borscht Belt, sort of shtick that's often about adversity and like that. So, but here's what I believe. I do a workshop sometimes called Pumping Irony, which is a stress management workshop. And what I tell people is this. Everybody knows, you all know this. When you've had a real laugh, a belly laugh, a really good laugh, it feels great. It's really very akin to crying. Or sneezing, but crying, but because your autonomic nervous system gets, when you start crying, if you're really crying, you're not in control anymore. For me anyway, if I start really crying really hard, I end up crying about the dog who died when I was 10 and all the other stuff that's just gathered up there, and I just clump it on there and I get a release. And laughter could be that same way. If you really start laughing, you see the absurdity of the human condition. You see how, the irony and the paradox in your own life and the life around you, and that helps lubricate the passage through life. But what I tell people is, your sense of humor, now bear with me for a second, it may be a bit of a tortured analogy, but I hope not. But like if your doctor told you, as mine is constantly telling me, you're 50 pounds overweight, and you have to lose weight, and this is what you need to do. You need to exercise. But really, seriously, if you were worried about your cardiovascular system, and they would give you some action steps to take, and so many hours of exercise or like that. Well, you do it because it's good for you, and you do it because if you do it long enough, your body will respond and you'll be healthier, and your cardiovascular system and your musculature will be available, it'll be flexible, it'll be healthy. What I believe is your sense of humor is like that too. You have one, everybody has one, but people wait until they happen to stumble upon something funny and then think, God, that felt good, and then they just wait for it to happen again. What I tell people, I do this little workshop and I leave them with a little prescription. I say, so what would it be like if you decided as a choice that you were going to have 6 hours of laughter? Now, you know what makes you laugh. I don't know what makes you laugh. I know what makes me laugh. If you haven't read Dave Barry's book of bad songs, I have 20 copies of that, and it will make me laugh every time. Calvin and Hobbes will always make me laugh. It doesn't matter how many years later. Things like, so you find whatever makes you laugh, and you clear the decks and laugh. Clear the decks and laugh again on a regular basis. Let me tell you what's going to happen. You're going to see the humor in situations. Your sense of humor is going to be flexible and available. Just like I say, if you want to save the kid that's dangling off the cliff and you're out of shape and weigh 300 pounds, a good time to start doing push-ups is not when the kid is crying for help. Okay, you got to be doing it before so you're ready when the kid cries for help. A good time to develop your sense of humor is not in a crisis situation. At the funeral home, putting on the red nose is not a good idea, okay? But if you are familiar with, if you have irony and awareness of the humor and laughter at yourself and others, then when you see humor in tough situations, like a lot of Maine humor, these Maine stories, like one of the most durable stories in the Maine humor canon, and it goes beyond Maine humor, it's a great folk story, is the Set Her Again story about the mother-in-law falls overboard and dies. I mean, it's ghastly, but it's a story that incorporates coming to terms with death. If you assume that death, infirmity, challenges, financial difficulties, all these things that we're afraid of, if you assume they're going to happen to a certain extent in everyone's life, it's good to know about those. So these stories that go on for us, they're very, very funny. Kendall Morse wrote a book years ago, and I illustrated it called Stories Told in the Kitchen. It's out again, but sans my illustrations. It cost too much. But anyway, he talks about the old guy who was, it's an old Maine story. And so this old 80-year-old couple was, she was after him all his life. She henpecked him, tell him what to do. She passed away, and it was Oh, it was like they had to bury her quickly for some reason, and they had the service in the home, and they were going down to the family plot, and she was in the casket, and the pallbearers. The thing goes. I'm making it quite short, but anyway, they're just getting to the cemetery, and they bump into the fence post, and she pops up in the coffin, and she wasn't really dead, and she starts lighting into him, and she goes on like that for another 2 years. And, okay, but then she dies for good, and he makes sure he gets the coroner out there, and she's gone, and that's for sure. And the whole thing happens again, and they're going down to the cemetery, and the guys, and everybody's weeping, and as they get close up to the gate, he said, "Mind the post, boys." Mind the But you see, a story like that, you see what I mean about lubricating? You laugh, but you also think. And you think about, my mom is 93 years old. She was born in Hancock County, Maine, 1923. And a few years ago, when there was a lot of conversation in the media about the recession and whether they were comparing it to the Great Depression and what was the same, what was different. And I figure, who better to ask? My mom was a little girl growing up in Hancock County, Maine during the Great Depression, And so I asked her, and I said, what's the scoop? What was that? She said, I don't know. She said, all anybody down in Brooklyn ever said about the Great Depression was that the Depression wouldn't be so bad if it wasn't coming right on the heels of such hard times. Let's see. And here's the last thing I'll say about that particular thing. See, what I like about stories like that, or lines like that, or concepts like that, you laugh, but then you think a little bit. And you carry it around, and you sort of take it out and look at it, because it's funny, but it's informing your life in a positive way. One of the things I've said, I don't do off-color, racist, sexist material, profane material. I just never have. I never saw the point in doing that. And people have come up to me all my life, and they'll say, "Hey, have you heard the one about the?" They start, the kike and the this, and I stop them, and I never knew what to say, but I was down at the Hancock County Auditorium, the Grand in Ellsworth, oh gosh, had to be 30 years ago, and I had a big crowd, and everybody had a great time, and this guy came up to me, "Have you heard the one about that?" And I finally realized, and I said to him, I said, "Let me ask you a question." He said, "What?" I said, "Do you think the reason I don't tell stories like that on stage is because I never heard any?" And now I use that. But the thing is, and I've said to go, see, I will laugh if a story is funny and it's also mean-spirited and nasty and salacious in some way. I'll laugh if it's funny enough, but the second I've laughed, I feel bad about having laughed. I don't feel good about myself. It's like eating something that has a bad aftertaste. And I look for something, a kind of story, a kind of humor that has just the opposite characteristic. You laugh, and then you kind of feel a little more connected to yourself, other people, a little more connected to the world around you. So in that way, I think some of these stories, they're not hopefully overly pedantic, but there's an object lesson in there, oftentimes.
So are you able to find in what's going on today, our election, tensions, stress, things going on, are you able to find things that you could turn into a gentle Tim Sample?
Well, it's interesting story? Because I thought about that. I like many other people, not all, but a majority by some 600,000, was rather devastated by the outcome of the recent election, and I don't think it's inappropriate to say I find Donald Trump himself personally, maybe not his followers, but deplorable actually. And so but and I was angry and I was hurt and I was frustrated. But I was thinking if I was going to handle that in a humorous way. So ask me what I think. Let's say we just started, start again, we just sat down, you just got here, and you just asked me what I think of, and mentioned his name.
What do you think about Donald Trump?
Ronald Dump, it's amazing. Ronald, and that anybody would have believed back when with dump steaks and dump towers and dump that he would actually be, Ronald Dump would be president of the United States and is make America hate again. Who would have thought that would have gotten to be, and it worked. It really worked. Look at it. I think what I would probably employ in a situation is a kind of parodical exaggeration of because to me the anxiety and the disconnect there and the friction for me, and not for everybody, but for me and for a chunk of people, is that this seems when my wife's a social worker, she had a word for it. It doesn't connect. It's absurd. It's absurd. It's like, this is crazy. Like, you remember the line in Back to the Future when Michael J. Fox goes into the future and it's the 80s, and he said, oh no, it's 1950. He said, no, it's 1980. He said, Ronald Reagan is president. And Michael J. Fox said, yeah, right, and Jerry Lewis is vice president. It was like, and it was like a throwaway line, but I'm thinking, I can't even think about, but there's an absurdity level. So I think what I would do is, because I think, as we all know, we have to absorb this. Wherever we came to from it, we have to come to terms with it and decide what we're going to do. I went on today I broke a 6-day media blackout. I listened to old Bob Dylan records and walked my dog. And man, if you really want joy in your life, get a Cairn Terrier. Holy catfish. I have a little puppy, man. My wife has been trying for at least 10 years to get me to walk. I walked for 45 minutes in 1978. It was not a good experience, and I didn't want to go back there. But I wanted to get this little puppy, and she kept saying, because she knows it, she said, you're going to have to walk that dog. You're going to have to walk that dog. You're not going to just sit there in the river like that. I said, okay. And I love walking this dog, and I just love it. And he's a real joy bringer. But I guess the point is there by sometimes exaggerating and always understanding. And I think this is the healthy part. There people who voted for Donald, they're not all deplorables. And I don't mind saying, the KKK, David Duke, I'll stand up and say deplorable, just flat out deplorable. Is this me? Oh, this is great. Are we on television?
It's not me.
Oh, good grief. It's my wife. She heard me talking. Yeah, it is. Hold on just a second. Hold on just a second. Sweetie? Kevin? Oh, it's a butt dial. Oh, no, it's not a butt dial.
Oh, you get rid of it.
Hold on, just a second. Oh, just a second. I got to call her back now. Don't worry. She forgot I was on stage, I think. But anyway, where were we? But I think, but my point is, I think I'll probably turn this off. What the heck? But one of the things that I think is important to understand is that, as I started out saying a while back, I deeply believe that most people we all do about the best we can most of the time. I think most people, I live in Washington County, the salt of the earth, these are people that will come. And, I'll tell you this, if your house burns down in Washington County, Maine, 3 days later at the local gym, it will be packed with people. There will be pickup trucks with God, guts, and glory, and pickup trucks with rainbow bumper stickers and everything, and nobody's talking politics, and they're all raising money together. I believe in that. But I also believe that sometimes when things change in cataclysmic ways, humor can be, not in every situation, but far more broadly than is generally accepted, can be a lubricant, can be a way of seeing the absurdity, and I don't think you can move past something until you first move. You have to move through it to get past it. And that means I have to take it in. I don't want to take it in. I want to change the channel. When something bad happens, I want it to go away. It isn't going to go away. So I have to find a way to absorb it. And then I can come to terms with it. I can decide down the line what I want to do with it. And oftentimes, humor is a great way to do that. Like my wife and I, we watch Veep,
Right.
And we love the over-the-top, bizarre thing, and we said we were going to watch last night. It's a little tame now.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
It's kind of passé. I mean, it was such an over-the-top exaggeration there, but just that little observation kind of moves us into where we need to be.
Well, Tim, I think we're going to take questions from the audience now. So,
Sounds good to me.
So hopefully people have some.
Somebody
for you.
look, he's right here like this.
Hi, Tim. Sorry. I was on the wrong side.
Oh, look, they got a mic. This is.
No, I'm really dangerous.
Oh boy.
Hi, Tim. Thanks for being here. I just have two quick little things. We talked once on the phone. Many, many years ago, maybe 15 to 18 years ago.
Wow.
Of course, I remember that because you're famous, and you're one of my top 12 famous people I've talked with in my lifetime. But I was with the Friends of Feral Felines. I've been with them for over 20 years, and we were doing some trapping, TNR type of stuff in Hermit Island. And you're very
That's
involved.
FFF for you guys.
Yeah, and you're very involved with the, is it the
I'm not anymore. I was one of the founders of
Right.
an organization called Paw on the Door.
Right.
And that
So I
was
remember we spoke one time, I called
Yeah.
and I left a message with your wife. You called me back. We talked about what we're going to do with some of the cats at Hermit Island. So thank you very much. I know you're a super animal lover, and so thank you for that. And a quick little thing was, for some reason, I would hope some people in the audience have 4 or 5 different funny situational humor things that they remember. It sticks in their brain, and every once in a while you just blurt it out, and it just has a great response. And I have 2 things I stole from you that I use on a regular basis, and 100% of the time I get a great and funny reaction. It's not something you blurt out, but when the time is right. One of them was anytime I'm on the coast, at a restaurant or Perk and Coat, different places. There's lobstermen, crusty old lobstermen around. I'm trying to break in and, trying to get them to be a little friendly. I'll be like, so, how do you know if them lobsters are twins?
Yeah.
Twin lobsters.
Thank you.
And the other one I stole from you and I still use is, how do they park all them boats?
In the same direction.
Go in the same direction.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So, thank you. I've stolen those, and I've had great luck with them over many, many years.
Thank you.
Question?
Oh, come on. Speak right. There you go.
Have you ever lived outside the state?
Never. I was born in northern Worcester County in Fort Fairfield. I grew up in Booth Bay Harbor. I've lived in Portland. I've lived in Waterville area, Palmyra, and now I live down in Georgetown Island and Bath, and now I live in Calais. But I've never lived, nor have I ever wanted to live anywhere but Maine. I love to travel. I endlessly. My wife and I went out to. We have had a couple of kids out in Montana. We went out to the Bitterroot Mountains, and then went up through the Glacier National Park, and went through Highway of the Sun. I tell you, I have acrophobia. I mean, don't do that if you, honest God, it goes off like this. You can't see all the dead bodies that come, but I've read enough Gary Larson cartoons. I know that down there. I'll tell you what, so, but we go out. Yeah, I love traveling, but I have never been anywhere that has tempted me to go and live there. I love the state of Maine. I always have, and the longer I live here, the more I love it.
This is a story about a man in Brunswick that you may have known of, but you may not know this incident. Dr. Pinfold was a very well-loved veterinarian in Brunswick. A friend of mine went into his office one time. It was around maybe Columbus Day, and he was waiting with his dog, and a woman came in, and her dog had encountered a porcupine. And she was in a flurry, and my friend Stuart said, "Go ahead, you can take my turn. Go ahead of me." So the nurse took the animal in, and Dr. Pinfold took care of him, and it took quite a while. And the clerk gave the woman a bill, and the woman went ballistic, and it became apparent that she was not a native Mainer. And she argued with the clerk and caused quite a scene in the outer office. And the clerk finally said, well, I'll have Dr. Pinfold come and tell you, explain the bill to you. So he came out, and the woman fulminated at him for several minutes. And he tried to calm her down, explain all the details and why it cost so much. And she finally kind of gave up, and she said, all right, I'll pay your damn bill. But the one thing I'd like to know is, after we tourists leave this state, what do you people do when you can't gouge us anymore for the rest of the winter and the spring? And without batting an eye, he replied, ma'am, we raise porcupines.
Wonderful. Okay.
Got enough.
What? See, you see that? That's it. That's the whole thing.
I think
I've
he
got
took
another-
your class. He took your class.
Yeah. Well, and there's a whole family of stories like that. And there's a great story that I have in one of my books, and a lot of these stories are 100, 200 years old. The great story about back in the day, at the turn of the 19th and 20th century, in the 1908, 1910, 1915, in through there, Bar Harbor was the big destination for people from New York or Philadelphia or up through, but they came by steamship, or they came, it wasn't developed the way it was, but they came by train a lot of times. So the way the story goes is that, and they have these, quote, cottages, these wealthy families of cottages with 18 bathrooms and so forth. So there was a fellow that was a businessman in Philadelphia, and he had this cottage, and for 60 summers or more, he had been coming in. They had the same caretaker, and this relationship between caretakers and the old line, he was very respectful. My uncle was a caretaker of a lot of properties, and they treated him very, it was like family. And they would do, and typically in those days, they would do all the work for a summer, and at the end of summer, at Labor Day, they'd present a bill and they'd pay the bill, and that was for the whole summer. Well, the old man passed away, and the way the story goes, his young daughter came to stay at the cottage, and she was cut from a whole different cloth, and she had quite what my uncle would call an altitude problem. And so she looked down on everybody. So she gets in he meets her he has the old Model T flivver, and he meets her at the train station and packs all her bags onto the back of the thing and gets her in. And then he starts down the road to the cottage, and he says, "Nice day, ain't it?" Well, she looks at him like he's nothing but a bug on the windshield. She said, "I pay you to do chores at my place. I do not pay you to have a conversation with me." Well, he never said another word, worked all summer long, did everything he was supposed to do, and at the end of the summer, drove her back to the train station, presented his bill, an itemized bill. Well, she didn't take that. She went down every item, one at a time, ding, 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 ding. And at the bottom, there was a $20 charge, and there was no item indicating what that $20. And she said, "What, may I ask, is that $20 charge for?" He said, "That, dear, is for sass. I don't often take it, and when I do, I charge for it." See, that's that same kind of, you got the punchline, and it's a snapshot of a relationship. It's a snapshot of a lot of culture. And that's what I mean about don't condescend. It's okay if you have differences of opinion, but don't think I think the main, what I like to think, historically and still today, because I love Maine and I love Maine culture, I like to think that you are judged, like Martin Luther King said, on the content of your character, that people are able to come and be and do any way you want, and you get along just fine here. Now, I know that can be considered a kind of a halcyon vision, but for me, it really is how I see folks more often than not, and I like to encourage that, because I think that is critically important going forward in the 21st century and beyond.
I've got a question here in the back.
Yeah.
Would you tell us your favorite story?
Gosh, I've told you a few of them tonight. You know, I don't really have a favorite story. It's almost like saying, like, what's your favorite kid, if you have a bunch of kids. But there are some stories. I have great affection for. Now, for the old storytelling traditions, and as I mentioned that I worked with Marshall Dodge, I was 7 years old when the first Bert and I record was recorded. Marshall Dodge and Robert Bryant did the first Bert and I record, and I was at that age, 7, 8, 9, I memorized albums. Boys will do that oftentimes, talking funny voices, and I learned all that. And to have met both of those men and worked with those men, but also learn from them. And there is a story, I won't tell it here because it's literally about 13 or 14 minutes long, but it is that Set Her Again story. Yeah, if you've got 15 minutes. But literally, I have told this story, and it's a set piece for me. It's full of, that story. Do you ever have a favorite song that when it comes on the radio, you've heard it 100 times, but you don't say, oh, I've heard that before, and turn off the radio. You turn it up, and you listen, and you want to hear, and if it's not the cut, if it's the live version that misses the verse, you're ticked off. No, I want to hear it just the way that is. This story, Set Her Again, is like that. And it has these wonderful pauses. And the Bert and I material, because I have a great affection. After Marshall's death, Bob Bryan contacted me. I met Bobby at Marshall's funeral at Yale University. I'd, of course, known about him. Marshall told me about him, but I never met him in person. And he was so gracious. And a few weeks later, he called me, and I went down to Bert and I, and he said, Marshall told me all about you. And we ended up recording. I ended up recording the album that Marshall and I were working on. I recorded with Bobby. And I'll never forget, this is a good story that I don't think I haven't mentioned it very much in a public setting. But so this was my first, it was my second vinyl LP because Noel Stuckey produced my first one a year earlier. But my first one for Bert and I, and it was the How to Talk Yankee. Parody of a Berlitz How to Learn a Foreign Language record. And we got Larry Richardson to be the narrator. And it would say, like on the record, it says, Scrid, a small portion. And then Bobby and I say, are you going to have another plate load of beans? No, I think I'll save room for just a little scrid of that blueberry pie. And it was like that. It was also but we were really excited about it. We had a great time recording it. And I had never met Leon Gorman. Bobby knew everybody in the world. And Bobby said, we finished it in, September or something like that of 1982. And we wanted to get it, in those days, the L.O. Bean catalog, there was one. There wasn't 57 of them, You get the girls' underwear calendar, a catalog, and you get the other, it's like, it was just one. And if you got a product in the L.L. Bean catalog, you sold a lot of them. It was just a thing. So Bobby said, he said, I've arranged, Leon's going to see us. And it was the first time I ever met Leon Gorman. I came to know Leon quite well. He was a marvelous human being. But I was just a kid, and I was nervous. And Bobby we used to get a thing called the test pressing from the acetate test pressing from the record company, and then you play it on a record player, and you see if you like it. You call them up, say, yeah, print them up. And so we went to Leon's. We had the cover art, and we Mark. I'll think of his name in a second, but did the cover art. And we sat in Leon's office. I was so nervous. I was looking down. All I remember is that he had a pot and palm, and the pot was a L.L. Bean boot, and and he had a little record player, and we played the whole thing. And Leon was just laughing and laughing and laughing. But these stories that Bert and I record. It has, which way to Millinocket? Well, you could take the coastal route that the tourists use. On the other hand, the punchline, you come to think of it, you can't go Millinocket. You can't get there from there. And, but they're like an old friend. And the lines in the Bert and I story, Give a blast of the hornbird. Wah. Give her another one. Wah. That were a good one. But it wasn't good enough. Just those lines. And you hear them, and the Set Her Again story has a pile of those lines in it. And to me, it's like a favorite poem or a favorite song. I'm big on how art and creativity informs our lives. You know, you don't just learn something once. Learning is a process, and it often deepens and takes root, and it's different to know something at 65 than at 35. You may know the same thing, but you know it in a different way and in a better way. And those stories that, you know, the way I put it is this. I believe that the oral tradition, and by extension, the recording of these spoken word recordings, like my recordings and the Bert and I recordings, I think that's the oldest form of publishing in the human family. Before there was any written word, before there was any cuneiform or any papyrus, that people told these stories, and they told them again. And you know, Grandpa at the Thanksgiving dinner, and tell the one again where you fell down over the stairs, and this happened and that happened, and tell it just that way, because encoded in those stories, the only reason they survive, okay, a lot of stuff falls away. There's a lot of stuff that comes and it goes, but if we have a story that's being told in Maine in 2016, and it was being told in 1916, and it was being told in 1816, think of it. I always think it's like a message in a bottle from our ancestors generations back, because something about that was worth passing along, like an old recipe or something. It's a thing, and it speaks. And I think I talk about this in my workshop a little bit sometimes, and you know, I think if you were to bring it down to its essence, a lot of that message in a bottle from the Maine storytelling tradition, if we were to be able to open the bottle and take the message out and read it, I think it would say something like, one of the most dangerous things you can do in a difficult situation is to take yourself too seriously. It's paralytic. If you think about what happens when you have anxiety and fear, everything freezes up. I do this in the workshop, and I say, you know, what happens? Okay, you lose your keys. You're late for work. What do? If you're like me, you look in the exact same place 6 times in a row. Yeah. That isn't the definition of non-productive action. I don't know what is. And if you have the presence of mind to see how absurd that is, as I did one day, and I threw my hands up, literally, and my hand landed on top of the refrigerator, and there were my keys. You know, sometimes you have to just break out of that mold, and by not taking yourself seriously, some new option, some new way that you didn't see a minute ago opens up, and you might be able to go down that road, and you get a little relief. And that's why they call it comic relief. It really is comic relief, and it's a wonderful thing. And it doesn't change. What I love about comedy and good humor in comedy is it doesn't change any of the facts. You're not trying to deny anything or pretend anything isn't so, but you're finding a way to look at them that allows them to be what they are, but doesn't crush you with the difficulty of the situation. You find a little levity, and that's wonderful. That's a wonderful thing.
I'd like to thank Tim Sample for being here tonight.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you.